Hello, and welcome to the Accountability Coach podcast, where we discuss proven business success principles related to helping you make more money and work less so you can enjoy having your ideal business and your ideal life. This is Bachrach. Today we have a special guest with us who I know you will find to be a wealth of information related to helping you forge through obstacles so you can crush your goals in the time frame you desire. David Osk is a standout in the world of entrepreneurship and product development. David is the driving force behind StatGuardPlus.com, a product showcased in over 3,000 retail giants like the Home Depot and Lowe's. David is passionate about personal growth, overcoming obstacles, and dialing in on the uniqueness of purpose. Well, welcome, David. We really appreciate you joining us.
Well, what a pleasure to be here with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to really pick your brain today. And as you know, I like to get right into the meat of things. So let's start with, a baseline question of what's the difference between mission and vision, and why is it important for us to have both of these?
Oh, what a great question. You know, what's interesting. When I think about the word mission, I think, there's more of this idea of horsepower behind it, meaning, there's something in front of me that I've defined as, and not to use the word in the definition, but mission critical, and meaning said problem or, whatever that is in front of me is really worth accomplishing. And that could be something that, maybe there's a fire that I want to put out that, something that breaks my heart or causes me some distress, as it were, around me. Or what if there's this idea of, there's a particular fire that I want to start. And so I love words, by the way. And I think that, if I were to sum mission up, for me, that is kind of how I look at it. Vision, I love this idea of, I forget where I heard this, but somebody used the word tether, but you're tethered forward. And so I think it's really fascinating when we talk about vision to have something, that we really feel kind of gives us goosebumps. It's something that maybe even puts that lump in our throat where we think, boy, if I could get there or accomplish that, or live, this particular lifestyle, or become, a person who does, more of this particular thing and has this type of impact, it kind of, tickles our imagination and our hearts. And so for me, vision is way more about obviously something in the future, but it's this idea of being tethered forward.
And then I think this is important to really understand is how are these two really connected together exactly to help us move forward? Can you define that a little more clearly?
Yeah. So, what I think is fascinating, one of the things that I do is I work with Dr. Andy Garrett, and we coach people through what he calls the True North Blueprint. And basically what that is, Simon Sinek wrote the book Start With Why. And granted, a wonderful thought leader, great book, so I'm not, kind of calling him out. But one of the things that Dr. Andy really helped me understand years ago was this idea of understanding the who before the why. Because this idea of self-awareness is so important because, if you really haven't predetermined the things in your life that are really valuable, and I'm talking obviously your values, what's the matrix that you hold up, in life to make decisions through, your convictions, what are those things that you believe are right and wrong? The virtues, well, these are all different. And I think a lot of people misunderstand these things and lump them all together. Virtues are, of course, this idea of an outward facing expression of those things. And then, of course, like I mentioned, what is it that, I think I got this from a Nissan commercial, by the way, what is it that gives your goosebumps? And, just really causes you to, your heart to swell. I also think there's a couple of things in there. My buddy Quentin Hafner, who's a great coach, he just finished a book called Go Next Level. And when he talks about, understanding your purpose and so on, he, asks some basic questions. And he, of course, expounds on these things in a unique way. But he says, what is it that breaks your heart? And he even says, what is it that pisses you off? And so it's fascinating when you start answering those questions. Well, then mission and vision start to take on a very unique to you form. And literally, at that point, you're able to write things down, identify, right? Identity, those things that make you and why you want to, tackle said mission and so on. And then also, like I mentioned with vision, it's like, the tether forward. I mean, it's going to have, in essence, it's going to, if it truly is pulling you forward, it's going to have your stamp on it. It's going to be speaking your language. It's going to touch those places in you that cause you to rise up and to look up a bit more.
Wow. All of these combined together really would get us thinking. And that's why I think it's also extremely important to understand just throwing together a vision or mission statement or, the why really isn't, you just can't do that. You have to really sit down and think and really dive deep into, what is really making you tick and how you really feel about things. And I think so many times people take these things lightly.
Right. Yeah, no kidding. And it's, by the way, I like the fact that you said feel. I think in quite often in our society, either the pendulum is all about feelings or it's which often removes intellect, and reason. Or it's kind of this idea that, well, you really can't trust your emotions and you need to have some very concrete things that you base your life upon. But what I think what's fascinating is that, it's both and those things should be very close cousins because, for instance, how do you know, again, another Dr. Andy thing here is how do you know that you have identified your own authenticity? And again, all of those things, goosebumps, what makes you furious, what breaks your heart, your intended outcome, like virtues-based, your convictions, your values, all those things. How do you know that you've landed on that? And what's really fascinating is that we tend to complicate these things, and kind of make them kind of woohoo language that's out in the, the ether or whatever that word is. And what Dr. Andy says is that, when you've really lasered in on those things for you, he says, follow the clues. Well, I'm going to back into this just a little bit. How do you know you haven't found those things for you? You know what? You're probably going to feel stuck. You're probably going to feel maybe apathetic, like you're just like, I don't really care about these things, and I wonder why. And your anger is going to start rising. As a result of that, you're going to feel, hopeless. You're probably going to have, just general frustration and irritability. And maybe, if it goes on too long, your anxiety is going to skyrocket and you could even, slip into depression and so on. My friend Chris Kelso, he wrote the book Overcoming the Imposter and talking about imposter syndrome. And, this idea that, when I show up in a room or I make that phone call, you feel like, well, I shouldn't be here, and like I'm faking it and all this, nonsense. So when you lack an identity, right? And again, that identity word has been hijacked in our culture. What it is just identifying those things about you that I've already mentioned and writing them down in your language, whatever that is. But how do you know then you found those things, right? You might think, well, I feel authentic. Well, what does that mean? Well, authenticity in its truest form needs to be summed up in several different words, but words like, genuine, free, clear, compassionate, courageous, it's like your best self starts to emerge and so on. And I tell you what, Ann, for years, I suffered so deeply with all of this because I kind of bought into this lie that identity was something that you achieve, or it's something that you find, or that lands on you, like you're dubbed famous, or you have accolades that, you're in your resume that people would applaud in some way. And so for years, I felt like I slipped into this, kind of people pleasing, basically handing someone else the keys to my own my own heart, my own joy. And what I think is fascinating is when you have someone come alongside you and ask great questions. I told Dr. Andy this. I said, after I went through your course, Dr. Andy, I said, I felt like you looked at me and said, let me introduce you to yourself. And it's life-changing, but here's the really wonderful part about all of this, right? Identifying these things so that you can understand your mission and vision and purpose and things like that. It's not done in a vacuum. It's not done in a silo. It's not done just because, someone asks you really great questions. That has to be done. That is I would dare say that's 50% anyway. But what's really wonderful is that, and I'll make a really big truth claim here. I believe that life is about relationships, period. That the entire point of life, is relationships. The rest of it is kind of a context, and again, can be a really wonderful context for that matter, with regards to accomplishing fun goals and standing by the, Grand Canyon or Glacier National Park or St. Paul's Cathedral in London. But what's fascinating is it's those things have value because you're standing next to someone, ideally that you care about, and you get to, enjoy and remark, with that word remarkable, you get to remark on things. And by the way, my kids, they're teenagers now. Well, one, I guess they're both teenagers. One is in college, but we all know that those of us who've had kids, right? When they're little, it's like, Dad, taste this. Dad, smell this. Like, Dad, watch me. Dad, they can't do anything unless, and they can't even enjoy it unless someone is, with them and watching them and participating in it. But guess what? We're exactly the same way. And we've just covered all that stuff up with a bunch of nonsense and shoulds instead of coulds.
Wow. I have so many more questions now. That was really awesome. So what other insight do you have about why you think self-awareness is one of the most important precursors to helping us achieve the level of success that we want to achieve?
Oh my gosh. By the way, your questions are so really well thought out and formed. So I feel like you're just teeing all these things up for me to hit one out of the park. But you know what? My buddy David Ash, he's in a mastermind group that I'm in, and he and I met about 6 years ago, and a few months into knowing one another, we went really deep, right out of the gate. And again, I've got some really close friends. I'm going to dinner with some friends tonight. My wife and I are, I'd take a bullet for, and they're just amazing humans. But just to your point, I remember David Ash called me one day after we had a group call, and he said, David, he said, I just want to tell you something. You're made of awesome. And it was so heartfelt. And I got this kind of lump in my throat. I'm like, man, thank you for saying that. I'm like, what makes you say that? And he just started kind of reading my label and validating, the impact and the way that I'm showing up. Everything from, a level of vulnerability to, some wisdom and just heart and even humor. And so what I think is interesting is self-awareness is misunderstood. And, of course you have people, even when I mentioned the word, the phrase imposter syndrome, you have people that they see not only themselves, but the world through a lens that is so clouded, so dark in a lot of ways. And it's because, they weren't told from a very early age that you are made of awesome. And I want to find out what is it that makes you tick. And I'm going to get behind that. For instance, raising children, right? The word raising or, comes from what? The word rise. And I think, what is it? When, when a child is, just living authentically, right? And by the way, we often think that, this idea of authenticity, where do we get that word even? It comes from the word author, right? We didn't make us. I didn't choose my eye color, my taste buds, or my personality. Nothing. And those of us who have kids know that they come out of the gate very hardwired. I mean, my two kids are so different, and you could tell from, weeks and months that their little spirits were just so different, and me and my siblings for that matter. And it's fascinating because children are, not thinking about authenticity, right? Up until they're maybe 6 or 7 when they get, slapped in the face or insulted or bullied or something, and then they start questioning everything. They're just, when you're operating, 0 to 6 or 7 or something, they're just doing their deal, right? Everything from their food choices to how they express themselves with friends, and some might be more aggressive and some are more tender-hearted, and they're just more creative, and all the different proclivities that they have. They're just doing their deal. They're not thinking about being authentic. But when the world happens to you, we live in a broken world, well, then we start questioning everything. And then we start buying into this lie that, well, I guess I need to, really bootstrap this thing and become somebody that people think is valid, as opposed to what? Relaxing into who we were originally designed to be. I love this idea. And by the way, as I'm talking, I kind of forgot your question here. I'm getting on a bit of a rabbit trail, so I might need to have you restate that. But I'll say this. I believe that self-awareness through this God-given lens that, hey, dude, you are made of awesome. And whatever you're into, I'm into. Like, let's get the shovel out and start digging and identifying all this stuff, because I just think you're amazing and I'm going to get behind it. I mean, can you imagine somebody turning that down? And so what I think is wonderful is as someone sees themselves, as precious, as good and kind and noble, well then, the shoulds start disappearing, and the coulds, start rising, and curiosity sets in. And it's like, well, now what's possible? What can I, when I start identifying the riches, the summum bonum, the highest good in me, how can I use that now to help, how about this? To help inform my why, right? If I don't know who I am, my why might be my dad's. It might be Joe Rogan's. It might be, somebody else's that I respect or kind of revere, because I've not done the deep work, and I don't even think that I'm worth knowing, and I don't trust myself. So self-awareness I think it has to be, the genesis of that has to be through a lens of kindness and awesomeness and love and safety and freedom. And that's where, I'm writing this book, The Guardians of Grit. That's where grit is baked, right? That's where the furnace is. And then you start to get that sandpaper, as it were, under your feet that comes from that intrinsic place in order to do hard things over a long period of time, to build a life for yourself and those you love.
Wow, that was really said profoundly. So I really found a lot of nuggets in that. So you mentioned grit. Talk to us about what's the difference between grit and resilience, and why is it so vital to have these questions really answered so that we can grow our business to the place we want to grow it?
Yeah. So I'll try to break these down really quickly. So resilience, when we think of someone as resilient, it just means they bounce back quickly. So, if you picture a basketball and somebody bounces it on the floor really hard, for half a second, it loses its shape, but then quickly responds and goes back to, the predetermined shape. And what I think is really wonderful about that analogy is the fact that, a basketball has a predetermined, and that's a key here, a predetermined circumference and a measurable asset. It's like GPS coordinates, as it were, to describe, everything about, the diameter and, circumference and even what it's made of, and, all of those properties that make it what it is. And so, actually, I'm going to jump ahead here real quick. So, grit is what? Well, it's doing something over a long period of time, because what's on the other side of that hill, as it were, is worth fighting for. And again, long period literally might be a 26-mile marathon, or it might be, a marriage that's really rough. And you know what? This is going to be something that I lean into because it's worth fighting for. And so again, they take on different meanings depending on the context. But what I think is really interesting about resilience, and this is what, when we walk people through the curriculum, and this is largely part of the Guardians of Grit book, is to understand the difference between these two things. So I'm glad you brought that up. But again, how does the basketball analogy, kind of correlate to us? Well, when you've predetermined, the circumference, right? You've predetermined those properties that make you to a granular, radical level. Well, then when you're resilient, you're not just bouncing back because you're embarrassed, right? If you fall down on the ground and so on, most people will just get up out of flat dead embarrassment. But what's interesting is there are some people who fall down and they're like, wasn't that awesome? Holy cow, I wish I had that on videotape. Like, they're not even thinking about embarrassment. They're like, isn't it wonderful to be human? And they laugh, just as much as everybody else, like, boy, that was hilarious. And so what I think is fascinating is when you've identified, the summum bonum in you, the highest good, and all those wonderful, noble, kind, good, precious, things that make you, beautifully human, you're not bouncing back to a what? You're getting up quickly, as it were. And again, we could, the analogy of falling down or whatever, tripping is kind of silly, but we can use that metaphorically across the spectrum of life. You're getting up to a predetermined who quicker and quicker as you become more resilient because you're on mission. You're getting up, for a specific reason because you're like, wait a second, I'm not going to, let's go a bit deeper. So what if you lost a sale at work? Say you're working for a company and you're on the sales team and you work for this big sale for a long time and it just, it fell flat. You have a choice to make in that moment. Am I going to get up, out of embarrassment or just desperateness and just, give it the old college try again and jump back in? Or are you going to, tap the brakes and again, acknowledge that was hard, but then get really clear again to that predetermined, who, what, why, when, how. And, and so for instance, you're working for a company that you really believe in. You love, the product or the service that you're, that you offer because you know that it makes people's lives better, so that you look at that, that bump in the road as exactly that. You know what? That's okay. Like, that happens, but I'm going to get up really quickly now and move on. These people didn't need that product or service right now. They might in the future, but I've got more people to help. And I love the impact that not only does my company have, but that I have, uniquely when I'm doing, these tasks and so on. And I think it's really important to understand that more like the job, becomes less of a job and more of a calling. So, again, grit then, of course, is just this idea of doing things for a long period of time. Because why? It's because it's intrinsically motivating to you as opposed to white knuckling it, not wanting to be a failure in someone else's eyes or survival mode or things like that. And I spent a lot of years with extrinsic, people-pleasing, desperate, embarrassing kind of thoughts motivating me to just keep going, as opposed to, I'm David Osk, and I love having this particular type of impact on others, no matter what I'm doing, right? I'm the same person with you, my wife and kids, and clients for that matter. And, my business is I'm selling products to really large corporations to get into retail chains and wholesale chains and things like that. And I've had all kinds of bumps in the road and answers that I didn't like. But I really believe in what I'm doing. And more than that, when I'm on a sales call, and I was on one this morning, I'm positioning myself as human to human. This is another sojourner in a world that's kind of fallen apart at the seams right now and can be really hard. But I've predetermined that I'm going to treat that person with, again, kindness and respect and get to know them and not treat them like something to be conquered.
Wow, so powerful. And you were talking about, when things don't go quite right, you fall down. The thing that I've always told my clients, I said, when you really think about it, what's the worst thing that could happen to you when you do this or when this happens? Then reverse that and say, well, what's the best thing that could happen?
Yeah, I love that.
So a lot of times we have this in our heads, a predetermined outcome that isn't correct, or we fall down and we think, oh, that was going to happen, or now boohoo, me, and I'm going to have my little 5-minute pity party, and now I got to put my big boy and big girl pants back on. And so, you have to really work to have that resilience and the grit combination together, right?
And isn't it fascinating, even as you're saying that, right? I mean, it's like the word grit and resilience just presuppose you are going to go through hardship. I mean, in fact, it requires hardship. You can't be gritty by watching TV your whole life. It's if there's nothing, a headwind, bucking against you, it requires difficulty and hardship. And by the way, I just want to acknowledge here, just being a bit vulnerable. I mean, I spent many years, feeling that desperateness to the point where, my weight got above 300 pounds, and here I am was a husband and a dad, trying to, make life work. But it was just drawing from an empty place in me. And, it was hard. And I just want to say that, for those listening, life is hard, period. But I tell you what, if you want to, not only do better, right, but then live life with a sense of joy and mission, if you don't know yourself, if someone, hasn't introduced you to yourself, good luck with that. But if you start to identify, that awesomeness in you, it's amazing how life can get, honestly, much easier. And you feel like you've just got so much more horsepower, but you also need, again, just a good tribe around you, to help you, because that's the way we were designed to live.
Any thoughts on what you think maybe are the top, let's just say 3 things that you think we need in our life to help us really deal with or break through obstacles that come in our way?
Yeah, well, I'll go back to, I'll back into it this way, and I'm not going to even say these in order. I'll reorder them at the end, but I'll kind of quote my buddy Quentin Hafner again. He was speaking for a men's conference one time, and he asked the men in the room, hey guys, just, and there's, hundreds of people in there. He said, hey, what's the number one thing your wife needs from you? And they start showing, throwing out, love and support and communication and, a lot of great stuff. And nobody got it. And he said, it's actually humility. So what I think is fascinating about that is if you kind of bring that, paradigm into the rest of your life, how do you become self-aware? It's really, you start with humility. You have to start by raising your hand and saying, the clues, right? I'm feeling frustrated, anxious, avoidant, apathetic, isolated. But it really starts with this idea of humility. You have to raise your hand and say, son of a gun, I'm not operating on the level I want to. My anxiety is off the chain. I need help. And for most people, right, and me included, right, for the longest time, we'd much rather just figure it out on our own as opposed to, raising our hand and saying, hey, here's how I'm feeling. Can you got any insight in this, or can you help me with this? So really humility, but then I would say self-awareness would be number 2. And that's a daily, by the way, you can really laser in on kind of the holistic view of things in a real hurry. I'm talking, really just in a couple of months, as we walk people through our curriculum. But then it's kind of a daily, course correction. And again, it's not back to a what, it's back to the who every time. And because if we sleep, we forget. There's a lot of very, very famous philosophers, theologians, thought leaders, and things like that would agree. It's really this daily type of an experience of course correcting and reorienting, and sometimes several times a day. But then the third one would be, this idea of a support system. I think it was Jim Rohn who originally said, you become, and this is a heck of a statement. We've all heard this 1,000 times. You become like the top 5 people you spend the most time with. Well, a lot of people would be like, okay, fine, that sounds, all great. What are you trying to sell me? Well, how do we know that that is a law like gravity? Well, those of us who have parents, who are parents, and had parents for that matter, know that we don't want our kids getting caught up in the wrong crowd. And we just so intuitively know that when our kids are 5, 6, 7, or even teenagers for that matter, we don't want them hanging out with the kids that are making poor choices and look like they're about ready to rob the place. Because we know so intuitively they will rub off on our beautiful child. Well, guess what? We don't think about that stuff for ourselves quite often. And I'm, just speaking as a man, I know a lot of friends or guys who have, they would say, yeah, I've got a buddy that I'm going to go play golf with, or, got some guys that are coming over tonight. And, you can go, play around a golf and, go screw around for a while. But is that really your inner circle? Are those the people that you're going to sit around a bonfire with and tell them, hey, guys, this is where I feel like I've got some strengths and I've got some weaknesses over here, places that I'm struggling in. But you know what? I've got some blind spots, and I'd really like you guys to speak into those areas because I don't know what they are. So I think it's really fascinating that when you let the what is that movie, by the way, the Meet the Parents, when they're talking about the circle of trust, and it's this idea that there is that inner world, that inner sanctum, that sacred space in us that not only needs to be understood, but it needs to be known. And I tell you what, when I started hanging out with people on an intentional level, to not only to be known, but to know them and to help, life just became completely different. And so I really believe that, the humility piece, the vulnerability piece, coupled with that self-awareness and, people around you to support you, and call you out on your, BS and everything else, right? People who truly love you. That looks like something. That's an absolute recipe for a joyful and powerful life.
Wow. You continue to say things so profoundly to me. And how they all work together, though.
Yeah.
How everything we're talking about really does work together in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. It's so, isn't it neat too, Anne, even as you said that, I'm thinking, mind, body, and spirit, it's like the marbling in a steak. You cannot separate them, and nor should we try. We tend to think that, the successful people in this world, have a, net worth of X amount, and, I guess they stayed married. It wasn't a real happy marriage, but well, they stuck it out, and, their kids don't hate them, that kind of thing. And what I think is really, really fascinating is I'm gonna take a little bit of a detour here, by the way. Part of my Guardians of Grit book is I really want people to understand that, this idea of princesses and knights and kings and nobles and so on. People think that those things are fairy tales, that the words, the language, the aroma around those things, well, that's a fairy tale. I'll be honest, I think that is the truest thing about life. It's, there are things, yes, that are true in this world, but the truest things are what capture our hearts to do really crazy, spectacular things, like, taking your girlfriend out in an airplane and, writing, "Will you marry me?" in a field somewhere on the side of a mountain. It's that stuff that, again, the goosebumps, that is well more true, the stuff that matters, well more than matter, than stuff. And if we start there, and we allow ourselves to, to think thoughts of, what would a king do in this situation? What would a queen do in this situation? What would a noble do in this situation? And you start understanding who you are. Well, then I think it's Seth Godin, he said, well, people like us do things like this. And you start living as the hero that you are. And I tell you what, it's, again, we're human, right? There's no utopia here, but you start acting in alignment with those good and noble, kingly, queenly places inside of you. Your wife starts to look at you different. Your kids start to look at you different. And guess what? You start to look at you differently. And it just feels right, as opposed to kind of white knuckling, scrambling, survival mode. I'm going to stare at my phone all day and hope I don't get too anxious today. And that's where I think most people are.
Sadly, I would sadly agree with you. Yes,
Yeah.
I think most people, they really don't, they're first of all not self-aware. They probably don't have the support system that they'd like to have.
Right.
And definitely are afraid to ask for help.
Yeah, and it's that, again, it's that humility piece. Here's maybe, you know what, I'm kind of sussing this out as I'm talking to you for the first time here. So I think there's something before humility. And this is getting a little bit personal here, but I think it's love. Meaning, so your audience, right, is, pretty high octane, business owners. And, it can be really lonely at the top. There's a lot of people running companies, that have addictions and all kinds of problems under the hood because they're just whacked out with anxiety. They can't handle it. And I think what's fascinating is my favorite quote, by the way, is by Benjamin Disraeli. He's the former PM of England back in the day, in the 1800s. And he said, "The greatest good you can do for another is not to share with him your riches, but to reveal to him his own." So what if, let me get back to the king and queen thing here. What if somebody walked into the court and sat down with the king, and of course they're like, man, this guy has the power to take my life, so they're like, I'm going to watch what I say around here. But what if that good king, and how about this? What if, a mom or a dad, right? You're the king of your own home. What if you were to look at the person, maybe it's your son who's having some problems, and you say, "Hey, buddy, I just want you to know that I love you, like unconditionally, and I think you're made of awesome. In fact, there's nothing that you could do or say that would scare me off. And whatever you're into, I'm into." What if that was the posture, of all of us to one another? Well, then all of a sudden humility and vulnerability doesn't look too scary, does it? And then, you start opening up the shoulds and not the coulds and not the shoulds. And then, this idea of self-awareness, like, man, I'm in a safe spot. This person wants to start identifying the stuff that makes me tick and thrive and grow and do. And they're going to put me in a position where I've got a support system. I wonder if that looks like what, the world was meant to be, right? This idea of, mom and dad looking at their kids and saying, "Hey, I think you're just absolutely spectacular. Let's start getting to know you and what makes you tick. And we're going to get behind that so that when you launch into this world, you've got more psychological safety and resiliency and grit and self-awareness and a support system so that when they launch, it's the exact same thing that they offer to everybody around them, because that's the new normal." And I think it was the old normal, by the way. But I really believe that it's, this idea of, love, whatever, you might choose a different word there, but I'm pretty touchy-feely. So I think it's love, then it's humility, then it's self-awareness, then a support system. And everything flows out from that with so much joy and horsepower. It's not even funny.
Think about what our world would be like today when people would act like this, be like this, think like this, exude this, as opposed to what it is.
Oh, just tearing each other down, mocking one another on from a distance, a safe distance on social media. There are shows now on television that are in the internet that are literally dedicated to tearing people down and mocking, those who are, less cool or savvy or whatever. Can you imagine if there was a camera placed on a room where, people like us showed up and caused the one next to us to rise by giving them absolute psychological safety to wade through the weeds and talk about difficult things, introduce them to themselves, shine a spotlight on it, get behind it, validate it, praise it, and then help them get there? I mean, can you imagine?
Yeah, I love that.
We all, have that place in us that, still feels scared and insecure. We never arrive. There is no arriving here. So what I think is fascinating, I just turned 50 years old last week, and, here I am at a new level in life, kind of leveling up to, expand my business and so on. But then I feel like there's a deeper calling, this tethering forward, this mission that I'm being called into, that I want to do in a very powerful way. And so I feel like, the word entrepreneur, by the way, Chris Kelso in his book, Overcoming the Imposter, I love this. That was my favorite book that I read last year. And he says, if you feel like an imposter as an entrepreneur, well, of course you do, but you need to change the language to explorer. If someone is busting new ground and going into an area they've never been, of course there's going to be doubt and insecurity, but you're not an imposter. You're a freaking explorer. You're the person who, threw some tools in your backpack, put on your running shoes and is like, all right, here we go. Let's go tackle something else. So of course there's that emotional resistance, but I love this idea of being an explorer. And then of course, helping as many people as I possibly can, explore whatever the mission they're on.
Absolutely. And we are all made of awesome.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I love that. I totally love that a lot. I might even start using that more.
Please.
I think it's so powerful.
Yeah. Well, you can just make sure to quote David Ash and not David Osk.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to share these great ideas and concepts that will help us all be made of awesome going forward and really living a life that's about relationships.
Well, thank you. It's been a real joy. You can tell I'm passionate about this. And even as we're talking, by the way, I feel like there's more insights that are coming out. So it helps to continue to explore these concepts because I'm kind of building the bridge as I'm walking on it with regards to the book. So thank you for having me today.
Yeah, it's totally my pleasure. And if somebody wanted to learn a little bit more about you, your book, or what you do, where would they go? What would they do?
Yeah. So, my website is davidosk.com, and it's David Ask, like ask. My main business is, you can visit my main business page, which is statguardplus.com. And then also I like to just kind of end things this way. If you go to my website, my contact information is on there. If you need anything, and I don't care what it is, let me know and I will do my best.
That's a big offer, and I really appreciate that. Thanks again, David.
Thank you.
Well, after investing your very valuable time with David and me, I hope that you gain some insights and ideas that will propel you to even greater heights in every facet of your life. I salute you for your hunger for more, your drive for wanting to be even better, and your unyielding commitment to becoming the architect of your destiny. Share the wisdom by passing on my Accountability Coach podcast to help ignite others, which can be found on most podcast platforms and in most English-speaking countries. And subscribe to the Accountability Minute for daily guidance on proven business success principles, which also can be found on most podcast platforms and in most English-speaking countries. Want more success resources and tips? Well, of course you do. Subscribe to my blog by going to accountabilitycoach.com/blog. And always remember to aim for what you want each and every single day. Until next time, make it a great day, today and every day. I appreciate you listening.